Hello, friends, and thank you for joining me on the Finding Elevation podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Thompson. I am a mountaineer. I've coached hundreds of aspiring mountain athletes to reach their goals. I also am the author of the book, Finding Elevation, Fear and Courage on the World's Most Dangerous Mountain. And I am super passionate about learning and growing through adventurous pursuits. That's why this podcast is dedicated to encouraging, uplifting, inspiring, and educating people like yourself who aspire to elevate their lives through the outdoors. So let's get into it. I'm very excited to share this episode with you. Joining me today is Angie Marie. She is an author, a speaker, also a podcast host, and a mountain athlete. And she is fascinated by the intersection of adventure and womanhood. And she's written a book about how to sync your period with nature and with your lifestyle. She also is just a very cool woman who's doing a lot of things to promote other women in the outdoors. So in our conversation, we talk about slowing down and connecting our bodies more with nature. Also, some really important and useful tips about how to manage your period in the wilderness, as well as how to set the right goals for yourself that align with your natural cycles. We also get into balancing the act of making things happen with letting things happen and how to manage our energy instead of time. Lots of good tips and info from a woman who spent a lot of time in the outdoors and who promotes other women in the outdoors. So have a listen. I hope you enjoy. So welcome to the show, Angie Marie. I'm super excited to have you on the Finding Elevation podcast. We met, let's give people a little bit of background. So we met because I was on your podcast, which is called For the Love of, and it talks about how people, the things, the trade-offs that we have to make in order to pursue our passions. And we sort of got connected, I guess, because we were talking about injury and illness and identity. And then you shared with me this really cool focus you have about periods in the outdoors for adventurous women. And I thought you would be a great person. First of all, I just wanted to continue the conversation we had when I was on your podcast. So I thought we could sort of, talk about what you're up to. I really want to get into this sort of really interesting, I think, intersection of being outdoorsy and periods. I want to talk about your book and also some of the work you've done to help girls sort of get into the outdoors. But maybe we can start with a little background for listeners and how did you find yourself at this point where you were like, I'm going to focus my work on periods, because not a lot of women wake up one day and say that.
Yeah, talk about a niche topic.
Yes.
Whenever I talk about what I do for work and I talk about this intersection of adventure and menstrual cycles, I either get this look of fascination or a look of, I'm a little scared, I'm running away now. So I'm hoping that most people listening are of the former mindset there. I never thought that I would be focusing on talking about writing about periods, menstrual cycles. Gross, right? That's supposed to be a curse. We're not supposed to talk about that in our society. We're supposed to hide our bleeding, suppress our ovulation, neglect any care down there or
Right.
conversation around it. So, of course, I did all of that as a child and as an adolescent, right? I got my period on my 14th birthday.
Oh,
Happy
happy
birthday
birthday.
from Mother Nature. I know. Wasn't looking forward to it, was ashamed of it from the get-go. I didn't
Yep.
tell my mom that I had gotten my period until that night going to bed when I was like, well, I really need more than some like toilet paper to hide this, you know?
Oh my
Isn't that
gosh.
sad? When did you get your first period, Lisa?
So I was really young. I was like, I want to say 11 or 12.
Mm-mm.
And it happened before school one day, like the worst timing. And I remember my mother must have at least been semi-prepared for this moment, because we had, like, this is the 80s. We had super thick maxi pads. And I
Mm.
remember her saying, put them in your knee sock and go to school. Like, put the spare one in your knee sock
Same
and
thing,
walk to
tampons in
school.
your sleeve, your long sleeve. I mean, we just wouldn't even walk in the hallways holding a
Oh,
product.
no. You get that little tuck under your sleeve and then you just cup it there until you get to the bathroom. Totally.
Totally. I know. And I mean, we operate in that way because that's how we've been conditioned, right? Is this
Correct.
is a gross bodily function. We don't want to show it. And so I tried to ignore my cycle for most of my life, my teenage years into
Yep.
college. I even remember going to summer camp one time and I was canoeing with a bunch of boys. It was me and my best high school friend and a bunch of boys in this unit. We were canoeing to this island for lunch and I got my period. I was probably like 15, got it
Oh,
on this island, stuck in a canoe, wearing white shorts. And of course, I go to the nurse's office because where else do you go at summer camp?
oh
They
my
give me
gosh.
this 3-inch thick maxi pad and a pair of
Mhm.
men's basketball shorts. They're like, here, you can wear these for the rest of the day. And I was like, from this day forward, I am not letting my period get in the way of my adventures, my goals, my
Awesome.
social life, my ego, whatever it
Is that
was.
really when it clicked for you, when you were that young?
Oh yeah, as a teenager, my friends and I had a code name for our periods. We called it dandelion. We just couldn't really talk about it outside of our very small, like, girls moments hiding in the bedroom, right? You don't
Yep.
talk about this publicly. So I just thought, this is a part of my body I'm not proud of. I have no reason to connect with it because it's done, quote unquote, nothing to serve me. And I
Mhm.
just ignored it. And then
Mhm.
in college, that meant ignoring everything related to the cycle. When we think about our menstrual cycle, we think, okay, possibly make babies, if not have a period. But
Right.
it's really related to your brain, your immunity, your metabolism, your thyroid,
Your
everything is
performance.
connected. Yeah, totally. I mean, we feel it. And there's so much going on in the cellular level that we don't see, right? Hormones, the chemical messengers
Yeah.
moving through your body, they are changing every single day. So you are changing every single day. But we usually just ignore that and focus on, am I pregnant or am I not pregnant? So for me in college, I was in this area of probably coping with some sort of like college anxiety of I'll just control everything. I will ignore
Mhm.
my needs as long as I just super structure my schedule, structure how I eat, structure how I move, come
Wow.
up with a plan and stick to it rather than asking what my body needs. That's how I'll find success, whatever success is for a 20-year-old, right? So I just ran constantly, worked out constantly, didn't fuel enough. Looking back, I was
Oh,
so
yeah.
undernourished, got the worst stress fracture that the doctor had seen that sidelined me from the sports I love to do. And I just thought, is this really what it means to be a woman? Is just
Mhm.
ignoring your body's needs? My body's screaming at me and I don't even know
Yeah.
how to rest. And I kept pushing through that until one week I was living in Utah, Salt Lake City at the time, and I started getting these weird bouts of spotting and stabbing pain. This was just after I had gotten my period back from a year of missing it from that
Because you're working
undernourishment.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, the overexercise,
Yep.
hypothalamic amenorrhea. My
Yep.
body just was prioritizing survival over the ability to be able to
To procreate.
potentially create life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I start getting my period back and it's working its way back into my life. I'm figuring out what normal is again. And so when I start seeing spotting in the toilet, I'm thinking, well, that's normal. That's what they say is normal in health class, random spotting here and there. That's not always normal. I start feeling stabbing,
Oh.
knives in my pelvis, and I think, well, they tell you in health class that cramps are normal, so maybe this is
Mhm.
normal. It just felt like I had no clue how to interpret my body. So I hid those warning signs like I had been for a decade
So
into
you
my
just
life.
ignored all that? The
Mhm.
stabbing pains in your pelvis, you just moved on like no big deal?
4 or 5 days, yes,
Oh,
I mean, gosh, I was like a glutton for punishment back then, so I thought, "Just fight through
you
the
get through
pain,
it.
fight through the
Right.
pain." And I took myself to an urgent care thinking I had a UTI
Yeah.
because I had never had a UTI before, and, they're awful, so I thought, "Well, maybe that's what it is." They tested me, took my urine to test for a UTI. They did not test for pregnancy, so I got misdiagnosed there. They
Oh,
told me I had an inflamed urethra, "Take these pills, it'll get better soon." I take the pills, did not get better soon. End up going to another urgent care clinic that night just before close. They do give me a pregnancy test and tell me that I am pregnant with an IUD. So I had had an IUD for birth control.
um,
That's a very dangerous situation.
yeah,
One of the most life threatening situations that you can have from pregnancy is an ectopic pregnancy,
yep.
where a pregnancy occurs outside of the uterus. And in my case, in my fallopian tube at 24 years old.
Oh my gosh, that's devastating.
Yeah, it was physically scary. I ended up getting my entire fallopian tube removed because of all the internal bleeding. My fallopian
Mhm.
tube had ruptured. And by far the harder part to heal was the mental side.
For sure.
How do you heal after 10 years of ignoring your body? And then once again, your body tells you, look, you can't trust me. This horrible thing was happening and you didn't even listen. I just felt so disconnected from my body.
From your
The way
body.
I ended up coping with that was actually getting out into nature and really diving into everything I could about the menstrual cycle, like total period nerd. Never saw this coming, but it helped me mentally work through it by understanding, okay, what is happening on a hormonal level? What is happening to my anatomy
Yeah.
every month? Why did this happen? Why did I get an ectopic pregnancy? How did my birth control play a role? How can I prevent this from happening to me or other people in the future? And then all of my time spent in nature slowing down a bit because I had to recover from a
Mhm.
surgery. I had to really examine my relationship with my body and my mind body connection. I started picking up on all of these signs from nature on how nature's fertile, right? For lack of a better word.
Sure.
We go through the seasons, we go through a garden sprouting after you plant seeds. It needs nutrients, it needs winter time to rest. And I started seeing from my studying the men's cycle and studying to be a doula and a fertility awareness educator, really one and the same, this inner wild and the outer wild. Women are really built to be, yeah, we are
Same.
adventurous creatures that operate seasonally. We operate within our own nature and in the outer nature. And that's when like everything about my life changed.
Was there like an epiphany, like some moment where that connection occurred for you? Or was it more like a gradual when that happens to me, it sometimes is a gradual, like just paying a little bit more attention. It's like something's been blurry and it starts to come into focus and those
Mhm.
connections are made. But I'm curious for you, what was there a big epiphany or was it a more of a subtle
There were
aha
several
moment?
subtle epiphanies within, I would say, about a year. Even
Okay.
when I left Salt Lake City and I moved to literally middle of nowhere, Washington, in the woods, nobody for miles, that was one mini epiphany of, okay, my entire lifestyle has just changed. It's a lot slower now. I don't have cell phone service. I don't have Wi Fi sometimes. When the power goes out, it might be a week and I'm cooking potatoes on my wood stove, right? And I just had to really slow down and operate from a mindset of this is how you're living a little bit closer to nature than in the valley where I can just look up out of my apartment and see the mountains. So that started getting me a little
Yeah.
bit more in the mindset of slowing down and embracing this more cyclical process of living instead of go hard city mode all the time. There was also collecting
Yep. Love
stories of
that.
other women who had had either similar or other menstrual cycle fiascos and what they had learned from that. That really helped. Knowing that a nurse who I had called in one of my, anxiety attacks post surgery while I was still healing mentally, she told me on the phone that something very similar had happened to her 20 years before. And that almost made me feel more connected to women
Mhm.
as a whole, that a lot of us have these invisible
For sure.
struggles in a taboo topic that we don't talk about. And it kind of fueled me to want to talk about it more because
Yep.
we all have a period story.
So I want to talk about a little bit about like having your period in the backcountry when you're skiing, when you're climbing a mountain. I have my sort of go-to ways to manage that, but I'm sure you have a very broad and deep knowledge pool about how other people manage their periods or how you manage them in the
Totally.
backcountry too.
I usually think about this as a step by step process, right? If you're just holding yourself back from going on a hiking trip because you know that you're going to get your period on it and that's enough to make you not want to go, then that's when I encourage people to start by just learning your options. I have done full presentations on just the pros and
Hmm.
cons of every menstrual product there for managing bleeding in the wilderness, right? There are pros and cons to every single one. I can't believe I went decades of my life without period underwear. Did you ever do those when you were bleeding more regularly?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's all I
It just
use.
feels, I mean, I used to be such a
Yes.
cup person and now
I,
I'm like, I don't want anything up there. I just love just like letting it happen. Yeah, it's so funny. It feels more
yes.
natural. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I don't know who invented those.
Mhm.
The brand I use is Thinks. I think there's others now. I don't know who invented them, but they
Mhm.
are
Just
game
way more
changing.
comfortable, and if you're going to be out backpacking for 3 to 5 days and you're on your period the whole time, it's not that heavy. You can rinse them out while you're there too, let them dry. Yeah, the gear is there now. They have
Yeah.
the pants that have the opening in the crotch where you can pee while you have a harness on. So you could change
Mhm.
a cup while you have a harness on. We're
Mhm.
really making cool strides
Mhm.
with gear that is built for menstruators in mind. So definitely, yeah, I mean, I'll share some blog posts if you want to dig into the pros and cons of every product and find some cool
Yes,
new products.
please.
They have little
Yeah.
you can build your kit. I like to call it building your backcountry period setup. So you want some sort of container to hold everything. Within there, you want a clean container
Yeah.
of unused materials, wet wipes, whatever it is you need for your preferred method. Then you want your dirty container, just like a pee bottle. You might cover it up with duct
Yeah.
tape if you want to. If you don't, want to be showing your trash to the world, I don't care, but to everyone their own. And then always practice at home. How many times have you heard of backpackers or hikers trying a pee funnel for the first time when they're out on the mountain? And
So everyone I coach, I say, I probably have this conversation once a week. Get your pee funnel, stand in your shower, graduate to maybe your backyard if that's okay for you, but do not make the first time you're using your pee funnel, same with your menstrual products, when you're on a harness and the wind is blowing and make sure you have it down before
yes,
you get
yes,
out
I
there.
learned that one the hard way too. It's also really, side note, the whole idea of a pee funnel has been really controversial from the conversations I've had. I have a couple friends who
Really?
think I don't want a pee funnel because why should I have to make my body more like a man's in order to do something? And so I'm like, that's a valid
Okay.
argument. Not that I don't know. It depends. There's also, I think, some
Yeah.
cultural elements where when I was leading a hike for a bunch of youth girls, we had a lot of Hispanic girls, and they felt way more comfortable with the idea of using a pee funnel. They thought that makes sense to me. If I had one, I would feel better than just stepping off
Yeah.
and peeing in the woods. There's just different communities
Mhm.
prefer different methods for peeing, pooping, periods in the outdoors. And the point is really educating yourself on what is available because it's not just tampons and pads anymore.
I
Yeah.
know. It's not. So yes, we'll link
Hmm.
the papers you've written or the blogs you've written in the show notes so people can see like pros and cons and pick what's best for them. And then
Hmm.
please practice it before your trip or your climb or your hike or whatever it is
And
that you're
also
about to
keep
head
in
off and
mind
do.
the low impact on the environment that you can have with that, right? We're not just like you don't throw tampons
Yes.
in the toilet, you don't put tampons in your cat hole. You can empty your period blood in a cat hole. They even have a little portable cup cleaner that you can shake it out, get your cup clean, and then dump that into the cat hole, right? Like there are
Oh,
ways that we can be low impact on the environment, leave no trace, even with our period products. You just have to have that set up ready
yeah,
to take with you before you go there.
absolutely. So okay, so continue. So you're living in the woods, you're starting to see
Mhm.
this connection, but at some point you made the leap from that scenario to I'm going to sort of be an
Mhm.
evangelist for this, right? It's more than just me exploring my own body and my connection with nature and thinking about the cycles and how my body is related to what's naturally happening in the outside world to like today you speak about, I mean, you're talking about it now, you stand on stages and talk about this. So when did that
Mhm.
progression and how did that progression
There
occur?
were many pieces of pandemic that lined up to people soul searching, considering every decision they had ever made. Do I even want this job? Do I want to be in this relationship? I was one of those people.
Oh yeah.
Thankfully, I actually had a very healthy lockdown period back in 2020. Again, I was living in the woods in Washington. I had miles of basically private to myself land during pandemic when everybody else was not allowed to
Mhm.
even go out on a lot of public trails. So I found myself very fortunate in a lot of ways during that time. I also had a lot of time to self reflect and take stock of where is my life right now? Okay, I'm underpaid. I'm not seeing any future financially. I'm feeling stuck in a relationship. I'm just feeling stuck
Mhm.
in my own life. And if there's anything I know
Mm.
about the menstrual cycle, it's that change is the only constant. And if you're not changing over a cycle, over a year, over your life, then yeah, I don't like that feeling of being stuck. Yeah.
You're dying.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so I ended up hiring a life coach. Coaching, absolutely. like everybody deserves some sort of life coach or mentor, somebody that's a sounding
Yes.
board who
Agree.
can reflect questions back to you, show you your blind spots. As soon as I started working with a coach, I started to realize that there were much bigger projects possible for me, a much bigger impact that I could have on the world. I had come from a nonprofit background. I've been working in nonprofits most of my life to increase outdoor access for underserved communities, in the wilderness. For a lot of that, it was girls and women, and I really found a home in that. But I started to
Mhm.
feel that if I was working for an employer who had a similar mission, there's a limit to how many people I can impact. I have to stay within the confines of a company. They have their own HR, branding guidelines, a lot of bureaucracy stuck in that too, of how can I impact more people to serve the mission that I want to share with the world. And for me, that was like, start a side hustle, try this business thing. And I'll tell you what, from the get go, though, I tried
Yes.
to force it again, almost from that linear mindset that I had before I started dabbling in the menstrual cycle and thinking about life on more cyclical terms. I thought, well, you just start with this exact template and then you grow. And then all of a sudden you're rich. And then you're making money passively. And I fell for all those tricks.
So my therapist and I laugh because I often am like to say to her, what are the 5 steps I need to do to solve this problem? Like I want a checklist, I want to be able to cross them off so then I know I'm done. And it is not like that. My background is in engineering. I'm a very logical thinker. My brain is comfortable when things are logical and when I can put meaning to them, but life is not like that. And being an entrepreneur for me has really tested, I'm sure you'd say the same thing, of realizing that that's not how life works. And going back to nature, I think that's not how the natural world
Mhm.
exists either. It's circuitous and there are ups and downs, and you start one thing and realize it's not exactly where you want to be or what you thought it would be. And then you shift to something else. And I love that you draw parallels between how we maybe should live as humans and how the natural world
We have
exists.
been, again, conditioned by society's expectations to live
Right.
on a 24-hour clock where you have to be productive during these
Hmm.
exact hours. This is the time you clock in, clock out. This is when you have to be immediately responsive to people. Oh, and by the way, make sure that you're in full productivity mode all the time. Block out what your body's asking for
That's
because
right.
you have to do the same workout with the same meal plan. It's just so structured and so linear. And a lot of times we're
Hmm.
taught that that is the way that you feel fulfilled at some point, is by just doing that same process day after day. Okay, well, look at that garden we were talking
Yep.
about. Look out at nature. Nothing blooms all year round. You have these seasons that allow your plants to grow, your garden to flourish. The sunflower is only going to bloom
Yes.
one season of the year, and then it has to decay. It's decomposed in the ground. You can plant a new seed, you can watch it sprout. And that's how
Hmm.
I exactly see the creative process, workflows, even exercise, even sometimes when it lines up nicely, planning my adventures around this cyclical process, it just feels so much more holistic, because then instead of trying to check, I did it, I won nature, I won work, it's more, okay, here's that reiterative process of what is my intention? Because believe me, we choose the wrong goals all the time. I still fight through this.
Hmm.
Setting up a strategy to get you there in the most efficient way, collaborating with the right people, and then choosing the right metrics for success. And to me, that is productivity. Those four
Right.
components is what it truly means to be productive, not just being in summer mode, full sunflower bloom all the time. Hmm.
Which is unrealistic, right? Like you said, even a flower
Hmm.
can't live that way. It needs time to regroup and reassess and actually like fall apart and then
Hmm.
build back up again. So you talked a little bit about how you planned adventures in a cyclical way, but I imagine there's much more to it. Like would you say you live your life that way? Do you plan your weeks that way? Like how have you incorporated this understanding into what you do
Well, I do
every
the
day?
best I can, which is not perfect. I
Right.
guess to back up, if you're wondering what goes on inside your body throughout an entire menstrual cycle, yeah,
Yes,
because
let's
most
get to
people
that.
think that your
Please.
period is the main event of a menstrual cycle. But that's wrong. Ovulation is like the defining gold star moment of your menstrual cycle. Because if you don't ovulate, you don't get a true period. So, this is if you're
Right.
still ovulating, you're not on a birth control form that suppresses your ovulation. You will ovulate. That changes the way that your hormones interact. You release that egg from your ovary. If the egg is fertilized and then embeds itself into your uterus, your uterine lining, then that's a pregnancy. If there's no fertilization, it doesn't latch onto your uterus. It will come out through the form of your period. You bleed for a few days, and then
Mm-hmm.
as you're bleeding, your follicles start growing again, which is where your eggs come from, and then the whole process reiterates. So, when I like to start with bleeding as the beginning of a cycle, even though, again, ovulation is the most important part. I hope that if you are of reproductive age, you are ovulating because it's so good for you. But since we can tell very obviously when we're starting to bleed, that's what a lot of people call cycle day one. That
Yeah.
first day of full flow bleeding on your period, cycle day one. And then you start counting the days after that. I'm on cycle day 2 right now because my period started yesterday. I usually ovulate on cycle day 14. Not everybody does. Health class myth right there. And then a normal cycle will last anywhere from 25 days to 35 days. That's a normal, healthy cycle. For me, I get 27-day cycles. That means that my time after
Mm-hmm.
ovulation is pretty close to the same as my time before ovulation. And if I boil that down even more into 4 parts of my cycle, the first half of my cycle being my period, and then the time after my period leading up to ovulation. And then there's the time after ovulation leading to my premenstrual days. And then those last few days, those line up for
Mm-hmm.
me perfectly with the 4 seasons of nature. I feel very wintry on my period. What would you say is like the energy behind winter if you had to use some adjectives?
So winter to me is slow and quiet and
That's how I
reflective.
feel on my period. What do you feel on your period?
Well,
Huh.
I'm 51, so now I'm just excited when I have one. But I usually feel, yeah, I like insulative. Like I want to sort of like hunker down a little bit. I don't want to, I'm not as excited about getting out and seeing friends or like pushing myself with a hard workout. I want to just sort of like be very internal and reflective and take care of myself and
I
slow
get
down.
so inward during this time. The first couple days, including today,
Yep.
I of my cycle, I get very much in my head, almost spacey. I would not usually ever plan a podcast interview at this part of my cycle, but since we had to
I was
reschedule,
just saying that maybe we
uh-huh,
should have
you could have gotten
rescheduled.
me during my sunflower bloom time, but instead you're getting me in my more moody, figuring out my brain time. But also on my period, I do feel more grounded because of that stillness, that slowness. In
Hmm.
work, I use the days of my inner winter, my period, as a time to take a look at my goals, ask, am I still on the right track for these? Do I need to change some of these goals? It is a very intuitive time for you to take a look at, am I on the path that I want to be on? Did I choose the right focus
Yep.
for this quarter, for this month, if you're, say, looking at work? For exercise or adventure, I really like to use these days for solo exercise. I don't want to go on a group hike at this time. And
Mm.
I just love to go for a long, easy intensity. And I mean, it doesn't
Mellow.
have to be necessarily easy. I'm training for a 100-mile race. I work out hard all parts of my cycle. It's more of I'm changing the mindset around that workout. I'm changing who I'm doing it with, where I'm going. I mean, I love paddling. I love being on the water on my period. So there's just like subtle tweaks. It's not like you're just completely
Mm.
lying on the couch during your period unless you want to. You can do whatever you want. But for me, it's more of a chance to really stay with myself and be really inward focused at that time.
At the time of your period. And I love that as a reason to look back at the last month and think of what's been quote unquote successful and to think ahead about your goals. So do you just put that in your calendar? Like practically how you just
I'm a
type it in your
Google Calendar
calendar?
fan. I also have a planner, a paper planner. I do both because that's my weird brain.
Yeah.
And for me, like to write on my paper planner what cycle day is coming up. So, say I got my period
Okay.
yesterday, right? So, yesterday I went through my paper planner and I wrote, this is cycle day 1, tomorrow will be 2. I know that since I have a 27-day cycle,
Yep.
I can write the next 27 days. And since I've been doing this for 7 years, I know how I feel on certain cycle days, energetically, creatively, socially. So, I can take a look at my planner when I'm scheduling my next podcast interview, social event, whatever it is, and think, oh,
Yep.
I'll be on cycle day 16. That's a great time for that. Or, oh, I'll be on cycle day 24. I am not going to want to go meet up with those friends.
I really want you to publish some kind
Actually,
of
I could get
planner,
super into that.
like a book for women. That, like, I just see that as being a
I like
huge
that a
deal for
lot.
people. And it would totally change how we as women planned
It's
our
also so
lives.
good for
And it would put us more in
yes, and
sync
it's
with
so good for
nature.
collaboration. I've noticed with teamwork, right? If you don't have to be self-employed for this to work. Imagine if you were on a team at work where everybody could openly and comfortably talk about where they are in their cycle. How powerful is that if you're in a small team and everybody's in a different season of their cycle? That means that everybody's bringing different
Yeah.
strengths
Yeah.
to the same project and you're getting that full cycle
Different
energy in one. Yeah.
energy.
So, I will bookmark that one.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that I feel like a lot of people, and I would put myself in this category often, I have these sort of epiphanies, but I don't always really incorporate them
Mm.
into how I live. I'm sure there have been some things that have changed my life, but I love that you've just fully embraced this and like it has changed, it sounds to me, how you live your life and how you show up in the world. And I
Thanks.
love
I think
that.
there's definitely two pieces. There's the practical side of, again, what are those habits you're doing? Are you using a planner? My winter time is more of an admin time for work. So I'm doing my monthly finances, I'm doing my reading my vision for the year, looking again at those goals. But then there's also the mindset side of, okay, why can I not communicate really
Mhm.
well today? Instead of getting down on myself, I can remind myself, oh, it's because I'm in this part of my cycle. And in a couple weeks from now, I'm going to be feeling on the other pole of that. I give myself grace in running.
Yes.
Again, I train for ultra marathons. And there are some days where I just get so down, or I used to get really down on myself thinking, why can't you do this? You felt so strong before. Why are you failing right now? And for me, now I know
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
there are some tools I can use if I'm going for a long run in my premenstrual days to help me feel as best as possible. But mentally, I probably just won't feel as motivated or as confident. And if I can plan ahead to know when those days are, I can make sure that I use those tools and remind myself that mentally it's okay. This is part of being a human. In order to have those high highs, we need to have the lower lows.
I'm in a different point in my life, right? I'm menopausal. And so my runs are not what they used to be. And I was talking to a nutritionist recently and sort of complaining about like, why can't I run as fast or as long? Why does it take me longer to recover? She said many very poignant things to me, but one was that you just need to give yourself the grace that like the way you show up to run today is how you show
Mhm.
up to run today. And don't compare it to yesterday. Don't compare it to where you want to be in a year. It just like accept this is where you are right now and know that you're doing everything you can to get the most out of that run or that paddle or that walk with your kids or whatever it is. I think as women, we are so hard on ourselves and we don't give ourselves the time and the space to be okay with this is not maybe how I
Mhm.
thought it was going to be. This and I hate to say the best because I don't think that actually exists. But I think we're not very good at just accepting where we are and
Mhm.
being okay
And
with
believe
that.
me, it is still a struggle for me. I'm a very future-minded
Oh
person,
yes.
right? I mean, my entire life I've thought, why am I not 20 years ahead of where I actually am? And again, that I know it sounds so weird and cheesy, but the menstrual cycle is the number one tool that I have in my life to bring me back to right now. What are the powers of right now? What are the challenges I can anticipate next week
Mhm.
based on that? And really that it's just allowed me to give myself that grace that I'm not the same person every single day. And some days I am meant to be on
Right.
stage with a microphone. And there are other days where I'm meant to be writing alone and never sharing those words with the world. Knowing when those are going to
For
be,
sure.
that is really at its simplest form how I use my cycle to plan work, running, whatever it is.
I love it. And I hope this podcast encourages more women to do that. Do you have a favorite tracker you use for your cycle, like an app on your phone?
Mhm.
How do you, yeah,
Yeah,
what
and
do you
I
like
want
for
to make
that?
it clear that you can do this as simply as you want or as extravagant as you
Yep.
want. Some people make beautiful works of art where they can handwrite and script all of their reflections for their cycle, right? In my book, I actually have just a very simple circle with some dividing lines in it, where at
Hmm.
the very easiest way to start, you could just write one or two words of how your energy feels every day. Do that for a cycle or three cycles where you'll really start to see the patterns and then you'll know. For me personally, I really like the Read Your Body app. I guess my side note on
Okay.
apps
I
is that
love
a lot
that.
of people, a lot of menstruators want to use an app to predict their fertility. That is red flag. You can
Right.
only make informed choices about your fertility and using fertility awareness for birth control if you are observing and recording your fertility signs. An app cannot do that. You are not a robot. An app can't feel your cervical mucus and take your temperature and know, okay, they're potentially fertile. So avoid using any settings on an app to predict whether or not you're fertile unless you have been trained by a symptothermal educator to do that. But you can use the features of an app like Read Your Body to track everything from, what are you craving today to how energized did you feel in your workout? Did your sleep habits change? Because those can change throughout a cycle.
Mhm.
And I just love you can have little emojis, you can rank things, you can add words, whatever floats your boat on that one.
I love it. I will check that app out. And so you wrote a book about this
Mhm.
whole idea of cyclical living. Um, what was that
Mhm.
process like for you? I always like to talk to other authors about the process of writing. And for me, it was
Mm.
unexpectedly cathartic. And I'm curious what was unexpected for you
Mm.
about
A
publishing a
few
book?
things. Number one, to be totally honest, this was not the book that I wanted to write for my life. As a kid, I always knew I would be an author. No idea about what. I'm a well-rounded person, which I used to see as a disadvantage, and now I'm realizing it's what makes me special. But I knew I'd write a book. I wasn't planning on writing a book about periods, at least not soon. And an independent publisher actually approached me and they said, this is an emerging topic. People are getting more and more interested in this. We've seen what you do, and it would be great if you wanted to this for us. And I said, I need some time to think. I took an entire menstrual cycle because, again, I kind of wanted to see. I'm like, if I'm writing a book about cycles, I want to see
Yeah.
how I'm reacting to this idea through the entire cycle. And I write about this in the book, actually, how I've had this habit in my life of, as a life coach told me, climbing the wrong mountains just because I love to climb. Just because I can do it,
Oh,
okay, I
wow. I
might as
didn't
well do
think
it if I
about that.
can. When that's not true. I mean, I should be or I could be choosing these decisions through a lens of my values and what do I actually want to do this. So I really committed to that for this book
Yeah.
choice. I thought I'm going to bleed on this. I'm going to wait and see how do I feel at each point in my
Mhm.
cycle. Is this a yes? I weighed the pros and cons, felt good intuitively, and I said, you know what? Even though this isn't my work of my entire life, the perfect book. This is a great opportunity to not
Yep.
have to write a proposal, find an agent, really stick my neck out to try and get into a
Oh, yeah.
really difficult project. I mean, trying to, yeah.
Get
Did
rejected
you
for
did you go
years.
that route of putting out a proposal and all that? Yeah,
Oh,
and
yeah.
exhausting, right?
So
I've
many
heard awful
times.
things.
Wrote it and it's exhausting. It really makes you question, like, is this a story other people need to hear? And there were whole years where I just put the project aside because it was just too overwhelming for me, or I'd gotten feedback that was negative and I didn't know what the next logical step was for me with writing a book. So it all worked out in the end. I'm very happy with the publisher I ended up working with, but it is not an easy road. Like people ask me now, would you publish another book? I'm like, I
I
don't
mean, they're not
know.
usually money
It's a lot
makers.
of
They take years sometime. You like
no.
don't even really get to see
Yes,
people holding it that often. Yeah, it's a very weird balance of identity and what
I
does this
know.
book mean about me and what do I mean about my book? It's weird.
Yes. Yeah, and I also I had never thought of myself
Mm,
as an artist, and I had to, like, shift that mindset of, like, I have created this work that's out there, it's going to be out there for other people to consume and interpret and have opinions about, and I have no
yeah.
control over that, and for the most part, it's been, like, heartwarming, the feedback I've gotten from people, but letting that go is probably the biggest lesson in surrender I've ever had
Yeah.
in my
There's
life.
this weird balance of letting things happen and making them happen. You need a little bit of both, right? And actually,
Mhm.
that's another great reason why I
Yeah.
use the menstrual cycle is half of my cycle is about making things happen and strategy and planting. Like my inner spring is about planting those seeds and deciding which ones I actually water and which ones I should ignore, those shiny distraction flowers, right? And summer is
Right.
about really putting myself out
Right.
there and pitching and presenting. But then there's other parts of my cycle that are more about letting it happen. See if work comes to me during my winter. See what
Mhm.
really matters and what I can get rid of during my autumn, my premenstrual phase. So for me that
Yep.
yeah, it was
Yep.
very similar to writing a book of I'm not going to force this. I'm so sick of forcing things. If you force it, it's not going to
It's
work. I mean,
exhausting.
the very first business that I created, that side hustle, was about teaching people about their periods. And again, all of those quote unquote business lessons and advice. I mean, I forced it so hard and it never felt good. It didn't get me any further. It wasn't
Yeah.
sustainable. So when I made that shift to let's let it happen a bit more. Let's be experiment, like let's be a scientist and see what happens if I change this variable. What data do I get from that? How can I reiterate for the next project? That's when I started to feel like a businesswoman where I actually had more control by being experimental than trying to force
Yeah.
anything. And same thing with the book, right? I decided if I'm writing a book about periods, I'm going to really lean into practicing what I preach here. So there were weeks where I did not write a single word. There were other weeks where I would write 5,000 words in a day because that's when the energy happened. I find
Mhm.
that I write better in my summer and I edit better in my autumn parts of my cycle. So yeah, it's you know how they say write
Interesting.
drunk, edit sober? Similar concept there.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I talk about that in my book of why are we always trying to manage our time when we can feel better by managing our energy? I'm not going to force myself to sit down and say, I have to write 1,000 words today because that just feels too limiting. But if I
Mhm.
finally get an urge after running 5 miles of I need to write right now, okay, capitalize on that because a lot more that's really authentic to myself is going to come out.
Yes, and I find sometimes setting those goals can actually be limiting on those days where 5,000 words were just gonna flow from you. If you had sat down with the intention to only write 1,000, you might have missed amazing concepts or
Similar with
ideas.
exercise too.
So I
I
think
think a lot of times you think, okay, I have to
yes.
run 6 miles at 9-minute mile pace, and that is my metric of success. What the menstrual cycle taught me, and also
Yeah.
what I'm not a personal trainer, physical therapist, or anything like that, but a lot of people who are talk about the idea of using perceived exertion as a way to monitor your
I
workouts, right?
agree.
So personally, I use an 80-20 method where 80% of my time training for endurance activities is at a very easy, sustainable pace. Like I could go all day. Only
Yeah.
20% of my time running is
Yep.
at moderate to hard paces where I'm doing more hill sprints or intervals. And so I kind of feel that way about almost everything I do. And again, not perfect, still trying to work out the kinks here. But if 80% of my time working, of my time socializing, of my time hosting events, whatever it is, can be pretty easy, then I can
Mhm.
really go hard in that other 20% of time. Mhm.
20%. And then the net is you're still moving forward, right? You're still evolving because you've got that 20% that's
Mhm. It's like the
pushing you
difference between
forward.
a flat line or an
And
up
you're
and
also
down sinusoidal curve.
yes. And I think of that easy as foundational too. It's building this really solid foundation that you can stand on. And that's the foundation of you knowing who you are and what you stand for and what your values are. And you're just, when things are easy, I think you're digging deeper into that. You're building that more. And then when you're pushing yourself, that 20% is about finding your boundaries and finding your
Absolutely.
edge
Doing the
and
things that
growing.
are a little bit scary. Totally.
Yes, which I think we need to I think that should be a part of all of our lives is to push our boundaries a little bit, to understand what scares us, to be curious about that, to recognize whether those boundaries are there
Mhm.
out of fear, out of something that's going to hold you back, or out of something that's meant to let you expand and grow. And over time learning the difference between those two and when it is fear to pull back and when it's something that, is meant for you to evolve and grow that you fully just embrace that and
Totally.
step into
Which
it.
is
I think that's so key
mhm.
is to plan it ahead of time. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. I have noticed, and I haven't found any data to support this, and I've heard from other climbers, women, our periods seem to start at the worst possible times. Like I remember being at K2 on K2 at high camp, getting to my tent after hours of climbing. I had to pee. I used my pee bottle,
Mhm.
and there's my period. I just got back from climbing in Ecuador, and one of the women who climbed with me there was like, it started 2 weeks ahead of time when I was on the mountain. So I'm curious if you've seen or heard of that from other people. I have some theories about why that might
Mhm.
be, but I would love to know if you have
Well,
any
this is
insights
where I
too.
always hesitate to say anything definitively since I'm not a doctor nor a professional researcher.
Yes.
But there are definitely some interesting pieces of research out there on how let's say high altitude affects everything, really, right? High altitude changes the way you process food, it
Yeah.
changes the way you urinate. You've been to much higher elevations than I have,
Hmm.
but even I've felt a big difference at 17,000 feet compared to 12, compared to 5, compared to sea level, right?
Yep.
So definitely, I would Google around, find some good peer reviewed research on why or how high altitude can affect your body. But since your menstrual cycle, again, is connected to the rest of your body, it's connected to your circadian rhythm, that's getting thrown off on a trip. That gets thrown off when you travel across the United
Hmm.
States, right? Anytime you're messing with one body cycle, whether that's digestion or sleep or blood sugar, that can have a downstream effect on your menstrual cycle as well. So when you're out on an expedition, high altitude, changing the way you eat, moving all day in a new area, new time zone, that can all add up
Yeah.
to,
Being dehydrated.
delaying your ovulation, getting it early. Yeah,
Stress.
there's a lot.
I would love some research to support that, because then we can start to counter that, right? So that it is more predictable and we're more prepared. But what I was about to say with that question was, be ready for your period at any time. Like, just because it's not when it's supposed to happen, my experience has been when I'm climbing that it can happen even though it's not on schedule. So have your kit ready to go. I want to talk too, because you've done a lot of work with just helping girls get more access to outdoors and sort of find their adventure. And I love that. And I so wish that that had been a part of my life when I was a little girl. Like, I was not an outdoorsy kid. My family wasn't outdoorsy. I wasn't even a little bit athletic. And sometimes I think about how different my life might have been if I discovered the mountains when I was like 12 instead of when I was, 32. So I'd love to hear more about the work you've done there, and also how we can help to eliminate those barriers for girls so that they have more
Mhm.
access to being
I
outside.
mean, I never thought I could mountaineer until 6, 7 years ago when I moved to the Pacific Northwest. I saw even Mount St. Helens with snow on it and thought, wow, wouldn't that be cool if somebody like me could get to the top of Mount St.
Yeah,
Helens? Now I've done that a million times, and I can't believe I thought that wasn't possible for me. When I see girls in this area or girls anywhere, I want them to be able to look at Mount Rainier and know that is an option for me. Now that I've climbed Mount Rainier and grew
100%.
from that, I I just can't imagine feeling like I can't do that if I want to. So for me at my time, I worked 5 years with the Girl Scouts, and my entire job was putting out curricula, scheduling events, finding workshops to get girls more comfortable with both the physical and mental sides of being outdoors. At Girl Scouts, I think this is the best model any organization can use to teach and serve communities, is we based everything on progression. So we had this outdoor progression model where
Mhm.
before you can even, step on Mount St. Helens, before you can go on a hike, before you can go to your city park and go for a walk, the first thing you do, the first step of progression is looking out your window. This is usually, we're talking to our kindergartners about this, right? But this could be any age. You could be 60 years old, and for the first time, really looking out your window and thinking, what do I see out there? What's that tree like? You're first looking out, is what they
Mhm.
call it. You eventually move on to meeting outside, going for a walk in your park, playing on the playground. Then you eventually move on to a day hike, eventually a backpack, eventually you're snow camping, eventually you're trekking to Everest Base Camp, whatever it is. But you
That's
have to
awesome.
start in those tiny steps. There's no overnight success, right? I mean, you'll sometimes get those breakthroughs where you find a mentor who
Yep.
will take you on something bigger than you expected. There are books that you can read in your own time to get the knowledge, but really where the real magic happens for girls and for anybody is taking those tiny steps over time to build up. And that's been
Mhm.
so heartwarming to hear girls of all ages, of all parts of that progression model, say how that day's adventure changed them. It makes them feel stronger.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know I could do this. And the thing is, the
Yep.
parents say this too. On the programs that I led where there were youth and adults together, the adults had the same exact experience of, I didn't know I could do this. I didn't
Yep.
know my child could do this. So what's next, right? And then they start dreaming bigger. They're like, "Ooh, we're going to find some hikes
Right.
near us. Ooh, maybe someday we could snowshoe." And then it becomes a ripple effect, right? Because they want to take their friends, and it just becomes this more collaborative community of women getting outdoors instead of a bunch of women watching, or girls and women watching a TV show and thinking, "Well, that would be cool if only I could do that." Mhm.
Yep. What do you find
Mhm.
are barriers? Like, the girls you've worked with, are there like is it just the unknown? Are they fearful of being outside? What is it that often holds little
There's
girls
a
back?
lot, and a lot of times it comes back to family circumstances too. Not every family has a
Mhm.
car. Not every family lives within a radius of a reasonable
Mhm.
drive to get somewhere. Or if they do, they can't afford the gas.
Yep.
There's even just the school year, right? How you have very specific weekends and times of year that you're able to go further than, the city that you live near, the state park that you live near. So transportation, time, obviously gear. Mountaineering, for example, to do a snow climb
Yeah.
of Mount St. Helens, even which is our smallest volcano near me, you still need crampons, ice axe, helmet, like harness, possibly.
Yeah.
It depends on what. Yeah,
Warm
all of that.
clothes.
And
Yeah.
the knowledge to find that gear. Do you know how many hundreds to thousands of dollars that can take if you don't have people donating it to you? I mean, I am so lucky to have gotten so much rejected gear from other people. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to do a lot of these. I think the hard part is that when you're working for an organization like the Girl Scouts, they're working with a really tight budget. If we could snap our fingers and make it so that there was a
Mhm.
free gear library and help with us accessing permits, which is
Mm.
another barrier. It's so hard with this Mount St. Helens example to get a permit for a snow climb on Mount St. Helens, especially on a weekend.
For a big
Or,
group.
yeah, even
Yeah.
a weekend for one or two
Yep.
climbers can be really difficult in the spring. So, of course, if we could snap our fingers and make all of these barriers go away, we would, but we're working with limited budget. We're working with volunteers who don't have the experiences themselves to help facilitate them for their younger girls. That's why we need to start looking at who are our uprising leaders right now. Our millennials like me, our Gen
Mhm.
Z leaders coming out of
Mhm.
college, how can we equip them with the skills to pass on outdoor skills to the next generation? And that's what I'm hoping to do, even with just periods, right? If I can get this next generation talking about menstrual
Ugh.
cycles in the outdoors, then they're going to pass on that information to the next one and on and on. And then we're all just screaming about periods from the mountaintops, which is great.
Well, and then it also it's not verboten anymore. It's just a thing that more than half of the world manages on a regular basis, and it's
Mhm.
not icky or gross or something we shouldn't be talking about. It's just a part of
And that's
living
a
on this
big
planet.
thing that outfitters and companies and guides can do. And I urge them to do right now is put things put info about peeing, pooping, and periods in your orientation materials.
Oh my gosh. Please, it's the 3
Yeah.
Ps to me. Just let's just talk about it. And I think maybe I don't know if we met before or after, but I hosted a webinar where that's all we talked about, which is because it's a big deal and nobody on a mountain wants to talk about it ahead of time. And then everybody's clumsy or uncertain or don't want to ask. And it just creates bigger problems. So, like everything else in mountaineering, let's prepare for it and practice so that when it happens in real life, we're ready and it
Absolutely,
goes
and you can
seamlessly.
build this accessibility into your systems. If you're a guide, if you're a mountain guide, I was a river guide,
Yeah.
you have a toilet kit, you have the supplies and the gear that people need in order to use the bathroom. What if you added not only menstrual supplies, but also items that everybody can benefit from, like wet wipes? Then it doesn't have to feel like, ooh, like I need wet wipes because I have my period. Actually, everybody likes a wet wipe here and there, and everybody can use their own little
Could use a
individual
web.
trash
Yeah.
bag that you've labeled for them and duct taped over. It's like the idea of universal design. We're not just trying to make it easier for people with periods. We're trying to make the outdoors easier for
One.
everybody.
Right.
And so, what are these pieces of gear? What are these policies? What are these orientation materials that can help all people and not just one subsect of the population? Even making your orientation materials an audio version instead of just reading, because not everybody can or wants to read
Yeah.
or retains
True.
information reading. So, thinking a little bit outside of the box, if you're a guiding
Yeah.
company or you work for one, how can we build in this information into our materials, into our processes and systems and gear so that people do feel more welcome and have what they need to feel comfortable?
And are comfortable. I love that. This has been super fun. Like I feel like we covered a lot of ground. Is there anything left that you want to make sure listeners know or think
Mm.
about before we go?
I would like to throw it back to something you said in our episode together before on my For the Love of
Oh boy.
podcast. You talked about how there was a moment on, was it K2 or Everest, where you really started leaning into your femininity on the mountains instead of hiding it?
Yes,
Yeah.
Everest.
And I was
Yes,
thinking about that a lot because I used to, back when I was in that phase of control everything, fit in, do what society tells you, I think I was trying to mimic men or masculinity in a way of, yeah, just fit this
100%.
mold, keep your head down, don't talk about those more feminine aspects. After my whole IUD fiasco and healing from that and becoming an absolute period nerd, did I start to see that everything in life got easier when I leaned into my femininity. When I started naming it,
Yeah,
embracing it, showing it off. I like to wear dresses on mountaintops for fun. I've gotten made fun of by men. I don't care. It makes me feel most like me. And then I have these really great memories to look back on and think, look, this is me in my element on top of a mountaintop and also wearing something that I really love and feel really awesome in. So, my challenge to
yes,
everybody is how
yes.
can you really lean into those aspects of you that feel like you, even if the world or activity wasn't built with you in mind?
I love that. Perfect. How also can people find you and your book if they're curious, or maybe they're a member of an organization and they want you to speak, or they own a guide company and they want to incorporate more about peeing and pooping and periods into their protocols? How can
Everything
people
should be
find
on my
you?
website, which is www.itsangieMarie.com. You can find the book tab there. My book is called The Cycle Syncing Handbook. It's very short and sweet. I wanted it to be very short and
Awesome.
practical so that you don't have to just read about, scientific words for hormones for 500 pages. It's very simple, plain. So you can pick that up on my website too.
Awesome. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you
Lisa,
for
you are
joining
a
us.
role model of mine, and I hope we can keep talking more and more in the future.
Ah, yes, we will for sure. Awesome. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If nothing else, you can say that you completed one thing today. All of the resources, products, and guest information that we shared can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out. You can also find out more about me and what I'm up to at lisaclimbs.com and at alpineathletics.net. And if you enjoyed this show, please subscribe and share it with a friend. Cheers.